Men everywhere are waking up to something they were never supposed to notice. It doesn't matter if he's young or older, newly single or long divorced, the same realization is hitting them at almost the exact same moment. Men who have never met, never spoken, never crossed paths are describing identical experiences as if they were all following the same script written by someone else. The same expectations that only go one way. The same emotional traps disguised as concern. The same pressure to give endlessly while receiving almost nothing in return. And what unsettles them most is this: none of these men coordinated anything. They didn't gather in a room, they didn't compare strategies, they didn't share battle notes. Yet they're all waking up inside the same truth. Something in modern dating has shifted, and the shift is clearly not in their favor. If you've ever found yourself blamed for emotions you didn't trigger, if you've ever been judged by rules she never followed herself, if you've ever been punished simply for wanting mutual respect, you're not imagining a thing. You're finally recognizing what has been in front of you for years, maybe decades, and once you understand what's driving this change, everything suddenly clicks into place. You begin to see why more and more men choose stability instead of turbulence, why they choose peace even if it means stepping away from partnership, and why they are no longer willing to carry burdens that were never theirs in the first place. Men across generations, from their 20s to their 60s, are coming to the same conclusion without ever exchanging a word. And I'm telling you this as a woman who understands exactly why it's happening. For a long time, men were expected to silence themselves. You were conditioned to tolerate discomfort, to swallow confusion, to assume that if things felt unfair, the fault must somehow be yours. You were taught to treat uncertainty as normal, to believe that being blamed was simply part of being male, to accept an unbalanced relationship as something you were supposed to fix by trying harder, giving more, or apologizing first. But something changed. For the first time, men are hearing each other. You're watching stories from strangers and recognizing your own life in their voices. You're realizing that what you went through wasn't a personal failure or a unique situation. It was a pattern. And patterns this widespread don't happen by accident. What changed wasn't anger. It wasn't resentment. It was proof. Technology became the one thing no one could argue with. Screenshots replaced vague retellings. Recordings revealed the calm tone men always insisted they had. Videos captured the moments when he stayed steady while being called aggressive. Clips exposed arguments where his voice never rose, yet he was still accused of shouting. The evidence started matching what men had been trying to explain for years, and suddenly the doubts that once made them question their own sanity faded away. This awakening isn't driven by bitterness. It's driven by reality finally aligning with intuition. And once a man sees something clearly, he cannot unsee it. He cannot keep blaming himself for dynamics that were created long before he arrived. He stops accepting narratives that contradict everything he witnessed with his own eyes. Because what men are waking up to now is not emotional. It is factual. And facts don't apologize. They reveal. Once his eyes open, the first thing he notices is how often the expectations placed on him were never applied to the woman demanding them. There's a sharp contrast between what she insists she deserves and what she actually contributes. High standards have never been the issue. High standards without accountability are. And that's what so many men are finally recognizing. You've seen it, a woman who insists her partner must embody ambition, financial stability, emotional maturity, physical strength, leadership, and unwavering composure, while she gives little more than the assumption that she is already enough. Social media amplified the sense of entitlement for many who never had to develop the qualities they expect in others. Their friend groups reinforce it with the same repetitive message: you deserve more, never once asking whether they're offering enough to match what they want. That part is conveniently avoided. This entitlement reveals itself not only in what she demands, but in how she receives what she gets. A man plans something thoughtful. She calls it bare minimum. He shows effort. She labels it insufficient. He tries to be supportive. She critiques the exact way he expressed it. Nothing is correct because nothing is ever enough. That isn't selectiveness. That's consumption without recognition of cost. Body positivity becomes a shield against accountability. She can change drastically physically or emotionally, yet expect him to act as if nothing shifted, and if he notices, he's accused of being shallow. Meanwhile, her preferences remain firm, unapologetic, and unquestioned. The signs appear early if a man knows how to spot them. She talks endlessly about her ideal type, but avoids discussing her character. She treats her expectations as unquestionable truths, but treats your effort as something she should automatically receive. When her demands continue to rise while her contribution remains flat, she's not seeking partnership. She's searching for someone to fund her lifestyle, validate her insecurities, and absorb her complaints without ever asking her to reflect on her own behavior. And once entitlement sets the tone, emotional confusion becomes the language. This is where men realize that in some dynamics, emotions don't just influence the truth, they replace it entirely. You've likely experienced it. She's upset, so it must be your fault. She's insecure, so you must not be doing enough. She's bored, so you must not be stimulating her. Every feeling becomes your responsibility, and once she believes that, she never has to examine herself. Manipulation hides behind emotional storytelling. She throws something in anger, it's because you made her feel unsafe. She damages something during an argument. Suddenly it's, I was overwhelmed. She cheats, and somehow the blame shifts onto you. Your emotional neglect pushed me away. This is the awakening men are finally having, and it's only the beginning. Because once a man starts seeing patterns for what they really are, the curtain doesn't just lift, it falls completely. And behind it, he finds an uncomfortable truth many women learned early. Every destructive action can be disguised as a reaction to him. If she lashes out, it's because he made her feel overwhelmed. If she lies, she was protecting herself. If she crosses a boundary, it's because he didn't support her emotionally. Accountability becomes a foreign language she never had to learn. Tears soften the impact of her choices. Emotional outbursts redirect the spotlight. And because feelings can't be fact-checked, they become the perfect shield. You can't counter a sentence that begins with, I just felt like, and that's exactly why it's used so often. Soon after comes the rewriting of the entire relationship. Chapters that were once filled with warmth suddenly transform into stories of oppression, but only after the connection ends. Moments she once adored are retroactively labeled manipulation. Sweetness becomes love bombing, closeness becomes trauma bonding, and memories she eagerly participated in become evidence in a case she builds long after the conclusion. It's not the past she's describing. It's the version of the past she needs to justify her present choices. And the red flags? They were always there. You just didn't name them yet. She never apologizes for her actions, only reframes them. Every story she tells features her as the wounded protagonist, surrounded by cruel villains who failed her at every turn. Nothing in her life is the result of her own behavior. Everything becomes a burden handed to you. If her emotions are allowed to erase the facts again and again, you're not in a partnership. You're serving as the landing pad for the consequences she refuses to face. And once that foundation deteriorates, the dynamic escalates quickly. When emotion becomes untouchable and accountability disappears, attention takes its place as the currency of choice. For many modern women, attention isn't a preference, it's a dependency, one that reshapes priorities, distorts self-perception, and turns relationships into performances. You've seen it happen. A woman walks away from a solid, caring partner because a semi-famous influencer liked a picture. Another throws away stability because a stranger with a few thousand followers sent an empty DM. It's not because those men offer real commitment. It's because validation feels like power, and momentary power often feels more intoxicating than long-term loyalty. Social media blurred the line between visibility and value. For many women, the dopamine rush of likes, comments, and reactions becomes more emotionally rewarding than actual intimacy. So the relationship stops being two people building something together and becomes a curated highlight reel for an audience she can't see but desperately needs. Some women aren't looking for deep connection. They're looking for an aesthetic. They don't want a marriage, they want a wedding. They don't want a partner, they want content. Their affection is measured not by how they treat the person beside them, but by how many others notice them being treated well. And the moment a man stops contributing to that public image, she begins to feel neglected. Not because he changed, but because the performance slowed down. She records private moments, stages conversations, fabricates narratives for strangers, and invests more energy into how the relationship looks than how it actually feels. This is the mindset that leads certain women into high-exposure online spaces with no regard for the permanent consequences. They're told it's empowerment, told it's liberation, told it's opportunity, but no one explains the psychological cost, the erosion of intimacy, or the fact that the digital footprint never truly fades. Validation today becomes regret later, but applause in the moment muffles any warning. The signs always appear early if you look closely. She prioritizes public attention over private closeness. She evaluates love by visibility instead of emotional depth. And if she needs an audience to feel appreciated, what she desires isn't connection at all. It's an audience. That's also why certain women insist their past is irrelevant, because they know it isn't. If it truly didn't matter, they wouldn't hide it, edit it, or rewrite the details every time you move closer to the truth. The issue has never been the number of partners she's had. The issue is the willingness to lie, to conceal, to twist reality to preserve an image instead of strengthening the relationship. When someone manipulates their history, the goal isn't privacy, it's control. Modern culture encouraged reckless choices without ever discussing consequences. Nights of impulsive decisions get recorded, intimate moments get posted, behavior done for attention at 20 resurfaces in her 30s. The internet remembers everything, even when she claims she doesn't. Employers search names, friends repeat stories, old accounts resurface, and suddenly the "it doesn't matter" narrative crumbles under undeniable evidence. And then comes the darker aspect, the use of pregnancy as leverage. Some women hide contraception, manipulate birth control conversations, or treat motherhood like a financial safety mechanism rather than a moral responsibility. That's why so many men consider permanent options, not because they fear raising a child, but because they fear being forced into a lifetime shaped by deception. Even the single motherhood empowerment narrative becomes contradictory. "I don't need a man" sounds bold until the same voice demands, "Real men step up." Independence is preached loudly, dependence is expected quietly, and when a man questions the inconsistency, he's suddenly the problem. Again, the warnings show early. She avoids direct questions about her past. She revises details every time the truth gets close. She accuses you of being controlling simply for wanting clarity. But clarity isn't control. Clarity is the bedrock of trust. And if she distorts her story today, she will distort your shared future tomorrow. You're not examining her past to shame her. You're examining whether you can build a life with someone who treats truth like something flexible. And this is where men ultimately realize the shift. Modern dating has become less about connection and more about consumption. Many men only notice it after they are emotionally exhausted. Growing numbers of women are taught to take as much as possible before offering anything of substance in return. Not taught how to build love, but how to maximize benefits. Entire online communities train women on extracting gifts, experiences, and financial perks without giving reciprocal emotional investment. It's sold as empowerment, but beneath the surface, it's exploitation dressed as liberation. And men are finally seeing it for what it is. Because once that veil lifts, another layer appears. The kind that reveals just how deeply transactional modern dating has become. You start to notice the gold digger mentality packaged as self-worth, where covering every bill isn't appreciation, it's expectation. Not because she values commitment or partnership, but because she's been taught that a man's willingness to spend is the only measure of his seriousness. Somewhere along the line, a distorted belief took hold that a man's wallet is his love language and her demands are simply standards. And it doesn't stop at expectations. For some women, it becomes a full system, a hidden rotation. One man finances the phone bill, another handles her car payment, someone else covers rent. None of these men are real partners. They're utilities she taps into depending on what she needs that month. There's no loyalty in it, no emotional investment, no connection. It's a cycle of extraction masked as empowerment. And the cruelty of it cuts even deeper when it targets lonely, isolated men, men who just want connection, who lead with kindness because they hope it will be reciprocated. She'll match with a man she has zero interest in purely for a free meal. She'll respond when she's bored, vanish when something better pops up, and return only when she needs emotional stimulation to bridge the gap between more exciting options. Mixed signals aren't mistakes, they're tactics, a way to keep attention, favors, and resources flowing without ever offering genuine intimacy in return. This twisted version of hypergamy isn't about seeking a man she respects. It's about chasing the highest bidder while investing the least. Love becomes a marketplace, and men become competing customers. Her time is the product, affection is the reward, and loyalty is negotiable depending on who provides the best benefits. And you always see the tells early on. She lights up only when money is mentioned, speaks endlessly about what she deserves, but never about what she gives. And the second you stop providing, the warmth disappears as if it was never real. A woman who treats your generosity as something she's owed isn't pursuing love. She's pursuing a resource she can drain until she finds a better one. But the revelation doesn't end with finances. It expands into something far more painful. Because one of the hardest truths men are waking up to is how effortlessly their pain is dismissed. A man can be in physical agony, barely functioning, and still hear the same cold line, "You're overreacting." Some women treat men's suffering not as something human, but as something humorous. They joke about their partner's symptoms online, laugh at their fear, mock their vulnerability for entertainment, not understanding that every joke cuts into a deeper wound men were never allowed to reveal in the first place. And that disregard extends beyond emotional and physical pain. It seeps into the realm of law, consequences, and responsibility. A troubling number of women behave as if nothing applies to them. They flirt their way through traffic stops. They record confrontations with police like it's content for their followers instead of a legal situation. Boundaries become suggestions. Authority becomes an obstacle they assume they can charm their way past. But that illusion collapses quickly when reality finally catches up, because nothing protects someone forever. Not gender, not entitlement, not a curated online persona. Inside relationships, the stakes grow even heavier. Some women begin weaponizing divorce long before the separation happens. They track arguments, collect messages, document every small mistake, not for healing, not for resolving conflict, but for ammunition. Alimony becomes a strategy rather than support. Courtrooms turn into stages, and too often, even when a man was the one betrayed, he pays the greatest price. The fallout spreads far beyond the couple. Children watch these dynamics unfold. Boys grow up seeing their fathers dismissed and disrespected and begin believing their feelings will never matter. Girls grow up watching entitlement rewarded and accountability skipped, learning early that victimhood can be leveraged. What happens inside these homes doesn't stay there. It molds the next generation's understanding of love, responsibility, and respect. Underneath it all is a predictable psychological pattern. When a group is shielded from consequences for too long, they begin mistaking protection for power. They assume accountability will never reach them, but life has a way of proving otherwise. The cost of these dynamics isn't emotional alone. It touches everything: your health, your freedom, your reputation, your finances, and the stability of any future children. The price isn't temporary. In many cases, it's permanent. And the biggest misconception today is that men are walking away because they're weak or scared. But that's not the truth. They're stepping back because they've finally done the math, and the numbers don't lie. They're not withdrawing because they dislike women. They're withdrawing because they've watched what happens to men who ignore the signs. They've seen good husbands lose everything. They've seen fathers erased from their children's lives. They've watched reputations destroyed overnight by accusations they can never fully defend against. And they've learned that doing everything right doesn't guarantee fairness, safety, or security. Meanwhile, the dating landscape shifted in ways society refuses to admit. Many women spent their most influential years pursuing the top percentage of men, the ones who were never going to commit, never going to invest, never going to choose them. Meanwhile, the stable, dependable men who would have built families were overlooked, dismissed as unexciting or too easy. Then reality hits, often in their 30s, and suddenly the question emerges, where are all the good men? But by then, those good men have already built new lives. Not out of bitterness, out of peace. They discovered they could create fulfilling, meaningful futures without tying themselves to chaos. They focused on their health, their money, their friendships, their growth. They replaced anxiety with stability. They stopped begging for affection from someone who resented giving it. And that's what terrifies the modern narrative. Not that men can't get relationships, but that men finally realized they don't have to suffer to keep one. Peace became more valuable than passion built on instability. Stability became more attractive than romance fueled by volatility. Men aren't struggling to find women. They're refusing to accept pain as the price of love. And in today's dating landscape, if a man still wants partnership, he can't rely on instinct alone. The rules have changed. Pretending they haven't is how good men keep getting blindsided. The first shift is internal, seeing yourself not as someone auditioning for approval, but as a man who chooses. And once you embrace that, everything changes. You're not here to prove your worth to a woman who hasn't proven hers. You're here to measure whether her actions, her decisions, and her character align with the life you want to build. Start with values, not vibes. Ask the questions that matter. How does she handle responsibility? How does she speak about past relationships? Does she own her mistakes, or does every story paint her as the victim while someone else is blamed? A woman's relationship with accountability will tell you far more than any appearance ever could. Then look at the company she keeps. Women reflect the circles they choose. If her closest friends thrive on chaos, entitlement, or manipulation, she won't rise above it. She will be molded by it. But when she surrounds herself with grounded, respectful people, it usually shows in her behavior too. Observe boundaries carefully. Say no and watch how she reacts. A woman who respects limits adapts without resentment. A woman who relies on control or emotional coercion will escalate the moment she doesn't get her way. Her reaction reveals her maturity long before any commitment does. Pay attention to the small things, especially how she treats those she doesn't need. The waiter, the driver, the cashier, the coworker with nothing to offer socially or financially. If she shows disdain, don't fool yourself into believing she'll treat you better when the novelty fades. Kindness and respect aren't situational, they're consistent. The modern dating landscape isn't hopeless, but it demands discernment. Choose the woman who offers as much as she expects. Choose someone who brings stability, not tests. Someone who understands reciprocity, not just desire. And most importantly, walk away from anyone who asks for the world while giving nothing in return. This isn't an attack on women. It's a confrontation with patterns that society refuses to acknowledge, patterns that exhaust good men, distort relationships, and punish the qualities that make love sustainable. There are women who seek partnership, accountability, and reciprocity. Women who give as much as they expect, who value stability over spectacle. But even they navigate a world where entitlement, manipulation, and performance have become normalized, and that affects the dynamic in every relationship. This is why your standards aren't unreasonable, your boundaries aren't excessive, your peace isn't optional. Wanting respect doesn't make you controlling, expecting effort doesn't make you demanding, and stepping away from someone unwilling to meet you halfway isn't weakness, it's survival. The loneliness crisis isn't about men being incapable of finding partners. It's about men refusing to sacrifice their stability, sanity, and self-respect for relationships built on imbalance. Solitude isn't failure when the alternative is chaos. Sometimes the healthiest decision a man can make is to choose silence over shouting, distance over damage, and peace over proximity to someone who thrives on conflict. And if no one else will say it, I will. You deserve reciprocity. You deserve honesty. You deserve a partner who respects the life you're building, not someone who drains it. If this resonates, don't scroll past. Stay, engage, share your voice, like, subscribe, and tell your story. in the comments. Your experiences matter, and your truth helps other men see they're not alone. The more we speak reality, the harder it becomes to ignore it. The more clarity you cultivate, the closer you come to the life, the peace, and the respect you've always deserved. You're not auditioning anymore. You're choosing. And that choice is the beginning of everything you've been waiting for.